Hello and welcome to the latest in our series of video analysis and deep dives into the English course. Today's lesson is in poetry and we're dealing with the subject of the Daffodils by William Wordsworth. Now before we go into this, if we're looking at this as a junior certificate poetry student, what I would recommend is that you go back and also watch the video on the Lake Isle of Innisfree by W.B. Yeats, because what that will do, it will give you a comparison, it will give you a contrast, but it will also allow you to examine the poetry under the common theme of nature. And nature is perhaps what we will look at as the overriding theme to this analysis. So, let's take a deep dive into this poem and see what we need to know from it, shall we? So, first things first, what you need to know is about the poet William Wordsworth himself. So, with every video that we've done since this class has started and since the lockdowns, in this series we've given you the background into the poet, into his life, his influences, any specific events that may have influenced him. As well as that, it also allows us to understand the themes and understand the appreciation and perhaps their style of writing a bit more. So the first thing that we notice is that he lived from 1770 till April 1850, and he died at the age of 80. Now, William Wordsworth was what we would call a romantic poet. And we know that he's English, and he helped launch what was known as the Romantic Age in English literature. So, what we also can see from Wordsworth's poetry is that a lot of it is semi-autobiographical. And again, that word, autobiographical, is a key thing throughout Wordsworth's career. Okay? So, autobiographical is, again, the person himself telling their life story. Now, of course, that they may use some poetic license and they may dress it up a bit and over-exaggerate, but because it's because it's autobiographical, just like Yeats and Innisfree, it's telling us exactly how the poet felt around this time. Okay, so in his early life, he was born to 5 children, and he was born in Cumberland, up in England, in a rural area. Okay, up and around the Lake District, and the Lake District is important here because these fields of daffodils that Wordsworth sees was in the middle of the Lake District as well. Okay? So, Wordsworth was born, as we said, in 1770. And his sister, Dorothy, was also born a year after him, and the two of them remained close their whole life. They were baptised together. So, this will become important later. So, you can call it the poem The Daffodils, or another title that it went under as well is I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. So when you're asked to name your poem that you're writing about, you can give either answer. Just for convenience, we're going to refer to it as the Daffodils because, being such a famous poem, the daffodils are the subject of the poem. Now, the Wandered Lonely as a Cloud is the first line. So it's a lyric poem. It's the poet's response to the beauty of nature. So the same way Yeats in the Lake Isle of Innisfree was responding to nature and how he was homesick in London and looking and longing for home. The contrast here, it's still nature. It's still a romantic poem where the poem is talking about the beauty of nature, but in this terms, Wordsworth is admiring home from his own land. So, it was published in 1815, but the poem recaptures a moment at around April 15th, 1802. So this would have been about a week after his birthday, in 1802. Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy, who we mentioned earlier, because there was only a year between them, and because she was a poet and had the same interests as him, they were incredibly close throughout their whole life. So they were walking near Lake Ullswater in Grasmere, up in Cumbria, which was again where there was a long belt of golden daffodils. So this was up in the Lake District. This was his own locality where he lived, and as we said, because of these events are recollected, Dorothy, who was also a poet, who shared the same love of literature, who shared the same love of the English language, also played her part in influencing him with the themes that he'd write about and even his style of writing. So there's a picture there just of Lake Ullsmere. So what we have is Lake Ullsmere is as real a place as Innisfree was for Yeats. So as well as being about nature, we can also look at this idea of what we call escapism. So it's how the poet gets away, how the poet retreats, what makes the poet happy, where's that poet's happy place, where's that sacred place from. So we're going to look at rhyme and structure, because you're not, when you're doing this in junior cert level, you're just asked about specific poems and you're writing about specific poems. So as well as being able to quote lines and being able to tell me the story of the poem, what the examiners will also look for in this poem is they will look for rhyme and structure. They will look, can you see the poetry techniques? So as we mentioned before, you treat this as if you treat it with any other song. The words are the lyrics, and the same way songs are designed, for clever techniques, clever ideas to appeal to the listener, the same way here as the poet, whether you're listening to it as it's being spoken or whether you're reading it, you're to see these techniques and how they apply. So, I wandered lonely as a cloud has a fairly simple rhyming form that fits its simple and folky theme and language. So when we say folksy here, we're talking about country, we're talking about rural, we're talking about basic. So again, the Wordsworths were highly educated people, but it's about this idea of simplicity, okay? All about simplicity and how that, just like Yeats, you're using that because nature is simple, nature is beautiful, nature isn't complicated, nor should it be. So why make things unnecessarily hard or difficult when you can just describe it in all its natural beauty? To Wordsworth himself, the daffodils, say more in this picture than words ever could. The same way Yeats talks about in a tree. So, it consists of 4 stanzas with 6 lines each for a total of 24 lines. And then we have this rhyming scheme which goes A, B, A, B, C, C. So, in previous videos and previous poems, we would have seen the A, B, A, B structure. And again, the A, B, A, B is every second line rhymes. That's coming up on your screen. But the CC here is the new one. So ABAB applies to poems like in a tree to 4-line stanzas. But the CC is what's known as this rhyming couplet. So the CC is this Shakespeare's idea, as we said here. Technique that was used by William Shakespeare in his sonnets. So I'll show you what I mean as we read through this. So, I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the tree, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils. So what we will do is we'll break this down stanza by stanza, line by line. But just before we start this, let's go back to this AB, AB thing we ran about. So we go AB, AB. So you have cloud rhyming with crowd. You have hills rhyming with daffodils. And then we have this rhyming couplet, this CC. So in a 6-line stanza, when you see the CC, line 5 and line 6 will always rhyme. Hence here, with trees and breeze. And that technique, that Shakespearean technique, is your rhyming couplet. So this is the first thing you can note about poetry techniques, that it's simple, it's basic, that it follows a structure the whole way through. Like stanza 2. A, B, A, B, C, and C. And just to show the consistency, you have AB, AB, CC, and in stanza 4, you have AB, you have AB, and you have C, C. Now, looking at this poem line by line and stanza by stanza. So, throughout Daffodils, there's a tranquil tone and there's peaceful imagery along with a steady flow of these rhymes that we mention, and this implies there's a joyful yet a peaceful feeling of being on a cloud. The way the poet, attributes his own feelings to parts of nature shows that he feels at one with his surroundings when he is in this special place. For 3 stanzas, the speaker describes a kind of utopia, a kind of perfect place where there's peace and joy in abundance, and it seems never ending. And in the 4th stanza, it's a bit different, however. He reveals that his time in this perfect place was short-lived, and that reality is different from his experience wandering as a cloud. However, this experience does have this obvious long-term effect on the speaker. So the same way Yeats in a tree, which you did in your earlier video, is brought back to life in London, where he has to arise and go now, the same thing happens with Wordsworth. So going back to stanza 1 here. In this first stanza of the Daffodils, Wordsworth uses what we call the first person perspective. And first person is basically referring to everything as I. So the speaker has experienced himself, so hence that autobiographical element. He personalises what he says, and this gives more depth and meaning to his words. In the first line, the speaker uses what we call melancholy diction. So melancholy diction. So in other words, a sad tone when he's speaking. And this melancholy diction tells us how he was wandering lonely. So the idea of lonely being alone, and was wandering lonely as a cloud. But then all of a sudden he shifts to a more euphoric tone, a happier tone, where he describes the host of golden daffodils here. In line 4. There's our change. So 1 to 2, there is this idea of the melancholy. And then all of a sudden, boom, you have a host of golden daffodils, changing his mood completely, just like that, like a flash of lightning. And he uses this descriptive imagery when he says that they were fluttering and dancing in the breeze. And again, the reader, immediately we sense that the speaker has been brought him to a utopia, that Wordsworth himself has taken us all of a sudden from wandering lonely and wandering aimlessly to this happy place. This peaceful language and the description of the beauty of nature allow us to feel, carefree and at ease. And also, what he does by using verbs like fluttering and dancing, he personifies the daffodils. So this technique of personification basically humanizes these objects, so makes them again more charming, gives them character in a way. Which takes us on to stanza 2 then. And in the second stanza, the speaker again shifts his focus from the daffodils and compares them, quite lovely, as continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. So as well as that now, we have an example of a simile. And that simile is comparing one thing to another thing. The speaker allows the reader then to experience the majesty, the pomp, the circumstance of seeing 10,000 stars at a glance. At this point, the reader begins to sense that he's not on Earth anymore, but rather in a place full of majesty and beauty, perhaps heaven or some other form of afterlife. Throughout the poem, this rhyme and this rhythm, this A, B, A, B, C, C, so we have every second line rhyming, and line 5 and 6 is our rhyming couplet, help it to flow smoothly, giving the readers a continued sense of utopian peace. So not only peace, utopian. So utopian is this idea of a perfect world. And as we know, the world isn't perfect, so the idea of a utopia, unfortunately, will never happen. So this peace is almost unattainable, so that's why it seems out of this world. It seems almost impossible. It's surreal. And the rhyme scheme, the A, B, A, B, C, C, is an integral part of bringing this reader the sense of rest and the sense of peace. This stanza here in stanza 2 not only allows the reader to feel the peace that Wordsworth himself feels, but also to feel life, to kind of feel regenerated, that this is not simply a peaceful place, but on the other hand, it's also peaceful, but it's also full of life. So you have figurative language, and you have again personification are used for the daffodils. So that they were tossing their heads in sprightly dance. So he's humanizing what should be inanimate objects. That he's making them feel that they're taking on a life of their own, that they have this charm. So again, the language is figurative. It's not literal that they're humanized, but it's just to give us that impression. And this gives the reader feeling that the peaceful utopian place is lively, it's spirited. Which takes us nicely onto stanza 3. And this third stanza continues the personification. It describes how the waves danced and the daffodils outdid the sparkling waves in green. Or in glee, even. Okay? So we'll just pause that to have a look at that in line 1 or 2. Now, what we also have though, looking at this continues to give our readers, and to give us more specifically, a sense of peace and joy, and it's combined with this lively action. The personifications of the daffodils also reveal their effect on the speaker, as he regards them with life and attributes them to the ability to feel the glee. So what you see here is you can see personification is a constant at this stage. So it's all about humanizing. It's all about making the reader, making it easier for the reader to understand it. That by humanizing them, you're giving them thoughts, you're giving them emotions, you're giving them feeling. So it's easier for the reader to adapt to as well. Now, the speaker then shifts the focus back to himself here in line 3. And he shifts it back by saying, as a poet, when he says, a poet could not be but gay. This portrays the effect the dazzling daffodils had on the speaker. Okay? So, when we're using the word gay here, I want you to think of it in the original 1800s meaning of happy. Okay? An important distinction here. This portrays the effect that the dazzling daffodils had on the speaker. When he says, what wealth the show to me had brought. It shows that the mere sight of these golden daffodils, somehow enriched his life and brought wealth to him. The use of the word wealth itself here reveals that this sense of peace and joy are worth more to the speaker than money or any other worldly wealth or possession. In a way, it's priceless. That you can't put a price on peace of mind or serenity or peace. It's the old idea, that money can't buy you love or happiness. And this then also gives the reader the idea that some things are worth more than money and worldly goods. And those three things, in the eyes of Wordsworth, are what all humans attain to. That they want peace, they want joy, and they want life itself. And these are Wordsworth's 3 keys to happy life in this poem, shown through the daffodils. And then we look at stanza 4. Okay, and again there's another shift. So it's back from a peaceful, joyful tone to one of pensive or, deep thought. He comes down from the cloud and reveals again the reality of his current physical state, that where he is, that even though he no longer sees the dancing waves or no longer sees the golden daffodils, he reveals he will never forget them when he says that they flash upon that inward eye. So in other words, they're deep in his memory. Okay, the speaker reveals that he not only still has the memory of the daffodils, but that he has also kept the memory of how they made him feel. He reveals this when he says, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So our CC rhyming couplet. This gives the reader the sense that the speaker has either been dreaming or possibly has had an experience in which he had caught a glimpse of heaven. And it leaves us as the reader with a kind of a want and a yearning to find that perfect place of utopian peace. Whether it's the daffodils in Lake Ullsmere, or whether it's somewhere like that Innisfree, which Yeats had talked about. So we look at this in the summary. And again, when you're going back and when you're reading this, to really show that you understand the poet, to understand your appreciation, to give yourself the best chance in doing the best answer possible, look at everything highlighted here in red, because you have to use these exact quotes. And again, guys, looking at it, it's common sense. The idea of the poet describing his experience at the sight of the daffodils during a lonely walk, how they give him this sense of joy. They have their beauty, they have their sprightly dance. They seem infinite, they seem limitless like the stars that shine in the sky. And it's no coincidence that he uses the simile of stars, because just like they're otherworldly, they're bright, they shine, they seem to be eternal in the sky and endless, the daffodils are the same thing. They dance, they're humanized. And again, going back to the very start of the poem, this sums up this romanticism that flourished in 19th century Europe. And viewers remember this from watching our history videos. When we say 19th century, we're talking about the 1800s here. Don't make that mistake of mixing them up, because it's all about our imagination. It's the key that unlocks the innermost depths of the human spirit. It's the thing that keeps us going, through the daily drudge of life. And imagination is best awakened by contemplation and thought and celebration of the wonders of nature and the basic things in life. So what we'll have here, as well as my audio commentary, we can pause this and we take a sidebar and you can read over these notes in stanza 1 and stanza 2, 3 and 4, which sum up the poem as I said it earlier. But we have to look at the themes of the poem as well. So we talked about the nature and its beauty, and how it almost seems surreal, and it seems, well, being the most basic thing on this planet and most basic thing on this earth, coincidentally or ironically, it also seems otherworldly, that it can take you to a different place even if it's straight in front of you. Happiness is a theme. You have the idea of man in the natural world, how Wordsworth's nature is full of life and full of vitality, that he appreciates its wildness and its unpredictability, but he humanises the landscape and fits it to his own mind. There's also, unfortunately, the theme of loneliness, where he talks about wandering lonely as a cloud, but you can't really talk about that theme of loneliness without mentioning nature, or without mentioning happiness, and how sometimes you can get out of that depression, you can get out of that melancholy. And if you're comparing it to Innisfree, you again have that theme of rejecting city life and going back to Mother Nature. We have the idea of memory, the power of the past. Again, Innisfree. Same thing with imagination, how it can take you out of that drudgery, it can take you out of these, basic daily life, how it's mundane, how you go through your chores, your job, your work, your study, whatever it is. But the thing that keeps us going is our dreams and our imagination and the human ability to escape, therefore. Looking at our techniques, so we have simile in comparison. You have metaphor, what the show to me had brought. So again, a metaphor is another term of description. You have personification, as fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So that humanises it. Now, emphasis is another technique used which is important. And the reason emphasis is shown is through the word dance. So we talked about the simplicity, the folksiness, the basicness, the back to nature, that nothing is complicated in nature. So and Wordsworth shows this, that, rather than showing all the different words for dance, he just uses dance over and over again. Because why complicate things? When you're in nature, just let your mind wander. Whatever comes into your head. Don't waste time thinking about nonsense. And that's what Wordsworth is saying here. So, in the first stanza, it denotes happiness and liveliness of the flowers. In the second stanza, it creates the sense of harmony. And in the last stanza, it refers to the fact that this harmony itself is advanced to include the poem himself. We have alliteration. So again, alliteration, you have the repeated B sound here in beside and beneath. And you have the repeated H sound in the idea of high and hills. You have consonants and you have assonance. Okay, so what we have with consonants, our example is wandered and cloud. And you have that and floats. So consonants would be an agreement or compatibility between opinions and actions. Or it would also be, in this case, the recurrence of, similar sounding consonants that are close together. So you have wandered, cloud, so you have that D consonants. You have that and floats. So you have the D consonants here, and you have the AT consonants that just allows it to, not so much to rhyme, but to flow easier off the tongue. The same way that the poet is floating and flowing through nature, it happens here. And we also have, of course, assonance. Okay, so assonance is the resemblance of sound between syllables of nearby words, and it allows, again, for that rhyming sound, even if it isn't necessarily rhyming. So, fluttering and dancing. Although you could easily just say that is rhyming as well with the ing. But a better example of assonance would be such and jocund. So that UC or that CU sound just reversed. And again, to make it flow that bit easier. And above all else, I suppose, if you're looking either at doing the poem Daffodil on its own, or want to look at it to increase your appreciation of poetry, or look at it through a broader perspective where you have to compare and analyse different poets and different poems, well, one common theme you'll see in Wordsworth, and what you'll see in some early Yeats, is city versus nature, and that whole debate. We have to live in this. It's argued that we have to work in a city if we want to make something of ourselves, if we want to be wealthy, if we want to be successful. But again, despite being surrounded by loads and loads of people and huge populations in cities, you can feel even more isolated. Whereas again, though, coincidentally, nature, which perhaps sometimes would seem like the more isolating factor, can take you home and make you feel safe and cared for. Because firstly, Wordsworth and Yeats kind of see this as a corrupted world, which lacks cooperation, it lacks harmony, it lacks a sense of caring, that it's a society in name, but not in practice. So he wanders lonely and hopeless. He prefers to get away from people, but nature makes him feel safe. And how he feels safe and how he finds this joy, how he finds this inner peace, how he finds this utopia in his head, is through the golden daffodils. The host of golden daffodils. So not just saying that it's a group of daffodils, but the term here, host, is that they were almost welcoming him in, that they were hosting him. You know, that they're dancing with each other, they're happy, showing that there are such things as harmonious relationships or peaceful relationships when nature and man works together and not for the detriment of each other. And this scene then changes the poet's feelings